two leading conservative voices in the Congress are shaking their heads, saying that isn't good enough. Senator Jim Demint of South Carolina and Congressman Mike Pence of Indiana have new legislation to indefinitely extend the current tax rates. Yet both also say Washington needs to do a better job balancing its books. So does their math add up? Senator Demint and Congressman Pence joins us now from Capitol Hill. If you match up the strategy, what your leaders are doing in these negotiations with the White House right now, with the legislation you gentlemen propose, to you, Senator, first, is it fair to say you believe at the moment your leaders are being too timid? They should be asking for more.
Well, I know they need to negotiate, but what Mike and I want to do is to allow every congressman and senators an up and down vote on a permanent extension. What we hear from the business community and individuals all over the country is we need some certainty. You can't plan to grow a business in 6 to 12 months. Sometimes it's a 5 or 10 year process. So to have certainty in what the tax rates will be is much more important than a temporary extension of the current rates. We don't need a temporary economy, and so we don't need temporary tax rates.
And yet, as both of you describe yourself as fiscal conservatives, Congressman, do you think you have the obligation then to put forward at the same time, the Congressional Budget Office says extending those tax cuts over 10 years would cost about $4 trillion in red ink. Would you put forward offsetting budget cuts and saying, look, here's what we'll cut as we cut these taxes as well?
Well, look, there's no question, and Senator Demint and I are of one mind and have been for many years. We've got to put our fiscal house in order with restraint, with budget cuts, with entitlement reform. But job one right now needs to be to get this economy growing again. And I got to tell you, the last thing, back home in Indiana, the last thing anybody wants to see Washington do in the worst economy in 25 years is raise taxes on anybody. And the House actually just voted today to allow a tax increase on small business owners and family farmers, and what Jim and I are advocating, I think would be broadly supported by the majority of the American people, and that is not a tax increase in 4 weeks, not a tax increase in 1 year or 2 years, but to say let's begin the pathway back to prosperity by saying that the tax rates are what they are. Let's permanently extend all the current tax rates, and then we can begin to build and rebuild our economy on top of that certainty.
Is that an absolute position for both of you? I ask that in the context of this debate we're now going to have about the President's Commission on Deficit Reduction and the plan they put forward. Perhaps they can't get enough votes to force a vote in the Congress, but they have laid out a plan that is eye-opening in some ways. And one of the things they insist that, yes, you need to raise the retirement age and do some things in Social Security, get some money out of Medicare, make some cuts across the government, the Pentagon and everything else. But they also insist that in the end, they would prefer a flatter tax code, take away some of the loopholes and some of the deductions, but also a bit of a tax increase in the end. Is that completely off the table for both of you?
Well, John, I'll start. I do like the flat rate tax. I would throw all the deductions out the window if we could have a lower flat tax rate. I don't think we need to increase taxes. And getting back to your previous point, keeping tax rates the same should not be considered $1 trillion or more cost to the government. We're just keeping the money in the private sector where it's been earned. So, again, both of us want to see us address the debt issue. One of the most important things we could do to address the debt is get the economy going again, and a permanent extension of the current tax rates would give our businesses, our individuals, our entrepreneurs more predictability so they could plan to add jobs in the future.
They are willing to risk everything in order to get a bonus round of tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. They are literally willing to stop everything, risk everything in the economy in order to get an extra tax cut. We don't care if it's paid for. It doesn't matter if it's paid for. It doesn't matter if anything else gets done. It doesn't matter national security. We're not going to take up the START treaty. We don't care about our relationship with Russia. We don't care about national security issues. We want a tax cut for our friends. Millionaires, billionaires, adding $700 billion to the debt. This is not partisanship. This is about common sense and what works. We have had a policy in place that has not worked. So why would we continue it?
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan. Senator Stabenow, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
There are reports tonight that House Democrats will hold a vote tomorrow on the middle-class tax cuts, letting the tax cuts for income over $250,000 a year expire, effectively calling the Republicans bluff. Do you expect that the Senate might do the same thing?
I do, Rachel. We have every intention of bringing up that vote, putting folks on the line, having to decide. In fact, it was interesting today on the floor of the Senate. A number of us were on the floor throughout the day, and Senator Schumer actually asked a Republican colleague today on the floor after he objected to extending unemployment benefits if they would be willing to accept extending tax cuts for folks up to $1 million but not beyond. And he wasn't willing to answer that. He was asked that several times. And so it's very clear what this is about. $700 billion not paid for, going on the national debt. A policy, as you pointed out in my comments earlier, that doesn't work, hasn't worked. You know, they've had this policy in place of extra tax cuts for 10 years, and I just want to know, where are the jobs? We've lost over 800,000 jobs in Michigan. If this had worked, I'd be on the floor fighting to continue it. But it hasn't worked.